Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, my name is Alan. Let's talk metal. So tonight I'm going to start some videos that deal with compilation albums. It's a topic I've been meaning to get around to. I'm going to have to do a series of videos. There's too much to talk about in just one. I feel like compilation albums have become something of a lost art. For those of us that grew up learning heavy metal in the 1980s and even into the 1990s, compilation albums were a big deal. They were often a gateway to exploring a lot of bands at once, getting to check out things without having to track down full albums by bands. But of course, as music shifted to the online environment, and now you can hear almost any song by almost any band anytime you want to, it seems like the need to put out compilation albums has kind of diminished with time. So there's still something that for us older metalheads, always have a special place in our heart. There's a lot of bands that all of us got to hear for the first time on one compilation album or another. So I thought I would start this sort of mini-series on compilation albums by talking about some compilation albums from new wave of British heavy metal. Because it's me, so of course I'm going to talk about new wave of British heavy metal, but also because new wave of British heavy metal is one of those scenes that has so many bands, and so many of them are pretty obscure that a lot of people feel very lost trying to figure out, what should I listen to? What should I avoid listening to? There's a huge range of things to check out. You've got hundreds of bands and literally thousands of releases that fall under that new wave of British heavy metal umbrella. So it can be very overwhelming just trying to figure out, where am I supposed to start? And compilation albums are a really good way to quickly check out a lot of different stuff. So it seems like this can serve as kind of a gateway to new wave of British heavy metal for those wanting to check out more of it, and make it a good starting point because compilation albums were a big part of that scene in helping a lot of these bands get some exposure and some product out there where fans could hear them on vinyl. Now, there's lots of different types of new wave of British heavy metal compilations and different levels of sort of rarity and scarcity or obscurity, however you want to phrase it. I'm going to be showing a range of things, and I won't be surprised I may even have to break up this new wave of British heavy metal compilation video into a couple of videos. We'll see how this goes and how long it takes. All right, some compilations will focus on putting a series of like singles or EPs together so that you end up with maybe like, 6 singles where you get to hear, both tracks from the single. Examples of this is an old series known as Digital Steel. This was done in the very late 90s, early 2000s. It's kind of an unofficial series, which some of these I want to show are. They only did 2 volumes of this. But as you can see here on volume 1, they included, picked 6 different EPs and singles that they wanted to feature all the material from. And yeah, they picked some very good things. The Hammerhead single is excellent. Both tracks on that are great. There were about 147 different new wave of British heavy metal bands that went under the name Warrior. So buyer beware. It's a real mess to untangle. TLDR, I'm not nuts about any of them, so I don't care which one is on here. It's not one of my favorites. Dawn Watcher, one of their 2 singles is on here. They were a band that had a more sort of progressive lilt to their sound. Boulevard is a relatively obscure one. Their song Dawn Raid is pretty cool, kind of heavy. Liaison is one I never got into as much. The last one on here is the Fire Clown EP. Fire Clown, I always thought that was a strange but kind of cool but kind of weird name for a band. Regardless, I always kind of liked the EP. It's one that back in the 90s was a monster rarity, but copies kept turning up over time that, it's to the point now where it's not considered a very expensive item anymore. So yeah, Digital Steel would do those kind of compilations. They did one other volume, volume 2 here. Gotta love those Windows 95 graphics. But this one, again, compiles some really good stuff. You have The Sweet Savage, their first singles on here, which of course is, an absolute ripper of proto-speed power thrash metal. The Weapon single is on here. It's one of the classics of the genre. Has a real rarity with the Sapphire single featuring Jealousy and Live It Up. Excellent songs, both of them really top-notch stuff. And unfortunately, it's also one of the sort of very high-dollar rarities and really hard to track down. You don't see it come up for sale very often at all. There's an EP by a cool band named Legend. The famous Blitzkrieg single is on here. The Aragorn single is on here. This one has gotten sort of a cult following over time. Their song Black Ice is a fan favorite for a lot of folks. And one of my personal favorites, Crucifixion, their first single, is also featured on here with The Fox and Death Sentence. So if you're wanting to hear complete singles by bands, there are some compilations like those that will focus on that. You just have to seek them out. Now, what's probably a better way for most newcomers to the genre to approach it is to get compilations where you're just getting the traditional one song per band. It will give you a wider range of things to check out on any given album. I think the benchmark for introductions to new wave of British heavy metal is definitely this compilation, which I've shown off in other videos. It's the 10-year anniversary set that Metal Blade put out called 79 Revisited. Yes, Lars Ulrich had a hand in getting this put together. It technically came out a year late, but it is an excellent gateway. It includes stuff by a lot of the seminal new wave of British heavy metal bands. If you never heard anything else, but you knew this and kind of knew what these bands sound like, you would know the basic ABCs of new wave of British heavy metal, I think, or you'd be very close to it. We'll run through the track list here real quick. Let's see. You've got basics like Diamond Head, Def Leppard, Sweet Savage, Weapon, which I mentioned on the other disc, Saxon, Trespass, Samson, Hollow Ground, Raven. Girls' School has a track, Witchfinder General, Iron Maiden with an early version of Sanctuary, Angel Witch with Extermination Day, Jaguar, Holocaust, Tigers of Pantang, Gaskin, Sledgehammer, Venom on here with Angel Dust, Blitzkrieg, Vardis. So yeah, you're getting a wide range, Praying Mantis as well, wide range of all the basic, you got to know, be familiar with new wave of British heavy metal stuff. Great compilation, very long, but definitely worth tracking down. This is, if you want to have one compilation just to sort of say, I know a little new wave of British heavy metal, this is the one I'd recommend. All right. If you like that approach and you want to start digging a little deeper, the best thing that's been put out on CD is an unofficial series of compilations that were simply called New Wave of British Heavy Metal Volume. They look like this. This is just a homemade sleeve for a copy. They did 8 volumes in this series. This was put out by a collector. The story I always heard was that it was put out by a collector in Japan. These started showing up in the later 90s. The last couple may have trickled out in the earliest 2000s. I know I became aware of the series and started picking them up right around 2000. I might have gotten one of them in like 1999. But on all of these, they really packed them full of different new wave of British heavy metal bands. There's sort of a pattern to the 8 volumes. So I'm not going to read off every track or anything. That would get pretty tedious pretty quickly. But the first 3 volumes tend to include good tracks, but again, they're by sort of the better known bands overall. For example, volume 1 here, again, you have Praying Mantis, you have Trespass, you have Gaskin, you have Diamond Head, you have White Spirit, you've got Sweet Savage, Black Axe, Angel Witch. So very good songs, very good bands. But there's stuff that if you're even a little familiar with new wave of British heavy metal, you're going to know most of the stuff on this volume. I'm not saying it's not worth checking out, but if you're a more advanced new wave of British heavy metal fan, most of this is stuff you've heard before. And the same tends to be true on volumes 2 and 3. Again, the story I've heard is that these first 3 volumes were put out very close together, and they really were sort of like, here's a broad, quick introduction to new wave of British heavy metal. Volume 2, which I also just have on a CDR copy, looks like this. And on volume 2, you're getting stuff like Holocaust,, let's see, Mithra, Limelight, Dark Star, although they don't have Lady of Mars. Kind of picked the wrong track there. Diamond Head makes another appearance. So again, a lot of bands you're pretty familiar with. There are, however, a couple of more obscure tracks worked in on this one. For example, you have Saturday Night by a band called Saturday Night Special by a band called High Treason, which is from a really obscure single, really good one. And you also have a song called Open Your Eyes by the band Damascus from a really rare 12-inch EP. That's just a really fantastic song, really professionally done. It's one of my favorites. So you're getting a couple of obscurities worked in here, but it still kind of sticks to the basics for a lot. And the same is true on Volume 3, which looks like this. Now, one thing to note about these covers, they feature lots of different picture sleeves and stuff, obviously. The picture sleeves on the cover do not directly correspond to the tracks included on any given CD. So just because this one shows the cover to, the Parallax EP, it doesn't mean for sure Parallax is on this volume. So you have to be a little careful. If you just glance at the cover and think, oh, great, this is going to have songs by, Satan and Axis and Parallax, you better double check the track list or you might be disappointed with what you get. Anyway, Volume 3 kind of is similar to Volume 2. You're still getting tracks by a lot of the basics. Savage, Satan, Jaguar, Fist, another White Spirit song, another Blitzkrieg song, Witchfinder General, stuff like that. There's a Toad the Wet Sprocket song on here, which is a band that was kind of associated with new wave of British heavy metal at the time. A to Z is featured again. But you're also, again, getting a few obscure tracks added in. You have a track by Hollow Ground from a really rare EP, which is a good one. They also had some compilation tracks of their own, which we'll get to eventually. Really rare song by a band called Aurora, which rose out of the ashes of A to Z after they broke up. And they put out a really good single that was pretty obscure. It's featured on here. The Great Persian Risk is on here. Not as obscure as some of the others, but never got the credit they were due. So again, good mix of introductory stuff with a few rarities sprinkled in. When you get to Volume 4, and again, reportedly there was kind of a little bit of a gap in time between the release of the first 3 and the next few, the person or persons putting them out really kind of went a lot deeper in the rabbit hole in terms of digging up really good obscure tracks and getting away from the better known bands. So Volume 4, now the rest of these I have the actual original disc from, so they'll look a little more normal. Volume 4, in my opinion, is the best of the batch. Everything on here almost is just fantastic. You've got tracks by Trident, Parallax, Satan's Kiss of Death, one of their iconic tracks. Marquis de Sade is featured on here, and that one developed a huge cult status. This was one of the first times a lot of people got to hear some of these bands, and Marquis de Sade became a fan favorite with their song Black Angel on here. An odd inclusion is track number 7. It's by a band called Scratch. It's one of the few times they slipped up and put a non-British band on one of these volumes. Later came to light that Scratch was actually a Swedish band, and so they're one of the first wave of Swedish heavy metal acts. Regardless of where they came from, their song Metal Breaker is one of the finest heavy metal tunes I've ever heard. Absolute classic of the entire era. So yeah, it's an excellent tune. They did put it out on a 7-inch single, which is one of those things that you basically have to, sell organs or, mortgage houses or meet people in dark alleys to do things you're not proud of in order to get a copy. Moving on, back to the British bands. Dragonfly was a very obscure one, but has a great track. Mindy's Prey is featured on here, and that's one of my favorite new wave of British heavy metal singles of all time from that band. Hammerhead has an excellent track on here. Band called Wicked Vicar, which is a great name, and of course, in true 80s fashion, it's spelled horribly, horribly wrong because 80s metal. But it's a great tune. Also, Seventh Son's Immortal Hours is one of my favorite new wave of British heavy metal songs. Really, really good one. They stuck around and did a few records here and there. So yeah, outstanding collection of, at the time, what were very obscure bands. Not a lot of collectors had gotten to hear this kind of stuff. After I got this and spent some time and more than a little bit of money tracking some of these down, I think I ended up tracking down at least 12 or 13 out of these 16 singles or EPs. The volume was that good, in my opinion. All right, volume 5 came out soon after that and kind of stayed the course. Again, excellent collection of really obscure stuff on volume 5 here. Whole lot of red on the cover of this one. But you get obscurities like a song by Energy, who did several singles. Reincarnate's classic Take It or Leave It, one of the best new wave of British heavy metal tunes ever recorded. You have a good track by Le Griff, although it's French, the band was British. You have a Sapphire track, the same one that I mentioned earlier. Their song Jealousy is featured on here. You've got one of the Overdrive songs. Their best track, On the Run, is on here. A real obscure track by a band called Midas. That's a little more commercial friendly leaning, but a really good song from a very rare single. Demolition became a real fan favorite off of this one. Demolition have a much heavier sound than is typically associated with new wave of British heavy metal. They leaned more in the Motorhead direction, had that more kind of gruff, gravelly, I don't want to say it's akin to biker rock influence on their sound. Big Daisy is featured on here. If you've watched any of my new wave of British heavy metal videos, you've probably heard me gush about Big Daisy or show off their hilarious picture sleeve, which I won't do again tonight. And also Prowler with a song called Forgotten Angel from a very rare single with a cool hand-drawn picture sleeve. So once again, here you're getting pretty deep into the collectible stuff with new wave of British heavy metal. You're well past the Tigers of Pantang and Girl School and Saxon level stuff. Volume 6, more of the same kind of good stuff here. Rarities by Elixir, which is getting into maybe post new wave of British heavy metal, but they still did some good stuff, including this song Treachery. Duchess, their single is very rare. Stormchild is a hideously rare entry here. You've got the Other Side of the Satan 7-inch single, because it is good enough to have both songs featured in this series. Mean Streak has a good commercial leaning song here. The Mighty Ricochet with a song called Midas Light, that's just a beautiful gem of a track. Scarab has a cool creepy one called Poltergeist. Stage Fright is another very, very rare one. Salem is hideously rare. Lia Drive, Hammerhead, the list goes on and on. And sort of an odd inclusion, the very last track is Angel Witch's Flight 19, which it's a little pedestrian for this lineup. One of these things is not like the other, and that track's a lot easier to find than anything else on here. And it kind of alludes to what was going to happen on the next two volumes, where on volume 7 and 8, again, it looks like there's a little bit of a time gap before they came out. And you see still a lot of obscure stuff, but it's becoming a little more uneven in terms of quality. You get the sense that by the time they do volume 7 and 8, the folks that were compiling these were starting to scrape around a little bit more to find really interesting stuff to fill them out with. So again, with volume 7 and 8, the layout's a little bit different, especially the back covers. There's like some very simple graphic here instead of just plain black with the band names. You still have some stuff that was pretty rare and new to collectors at the time, like Radium's Angel of Fear. Really good song on here by a band called Wolf, entitled Creatures of the Night. It's not the same Wolf that did the Edge of the World LP. Different band completely. You have some that are kind of rare, but again, in my opinion, at least, they're a little more pedestrian. Stuff like Fugitive and Frenzy, Torture, Renegade. These are tough ones to find, but didn't really wow me the way a lot of the other tracks on the last few volumes had. There are some other really notable things. Lotus Cruise has a great song on here called Tonight. There's a track on here from the Speed single. It's not a particularly great song, but it is the first vinyl appearance of a very young Bruce Dickinson, pre-Samson and pre-Iron Maiden. So that, of course, is a big-time collectible. The gem on this volume is a band called Tempest Ride, who would later changed their name to, I believe they became Laya Drive, if I remember right. The song on here is from a really obscure compilation, and the track is just magnificent. It's one of those true new wave of British heavy metal anthems called Another Time, Another Place. Love that tune. But then again, you've got one last one that's pretty good on here that's rare. Is from a band called White Heat. Featured a guitarist who had also been in a previous band that's going to be on the next volume. But then you also have a few things like there's a Tank song on here. And it is an alternative version of Run Like Hell, but it's still like Tank doesn't really fit with this lineup so much. It also ends on a couple of odd tracks by Pyramid and Shogun, which, again, don't really fit in with this sort of, 3/4 of this or more, they're going for these, very ultra obscure rarities, and then you got Tank, Pyramid, and Shogun wrapping it up. So again, quality getting a little uneven here. Volume 8 is the last one in the series, and kind of picks up where Volume 7 left off. Again, it's got the different formatting on the back cover, so you can tell it came out a little bit different. Starts off with an incredible track by JJ's Powerhouse, which, again, the guitarist would later be in White Heat. You have a great song by a band called Mars, who have a great picture sleeve of a little Martian playing a guitar, typical monochrome new wave of British heavy metal sleeve. You also have other big rarities like Apocalypse's Stormchild, which is a great track. The band became known as Omega after that. Demon Pact is on here, Lara Trek, Truffle. These are very rare ones. One of the Urchin songs is included, and that features young members who would go on to Iron Maiden. So obviously another big collectible. But again, even among the rare tracks, some of them are pretty iffy in terms of quality, at least in my opinion. Like there's a song on here by a band called Anthem. It's called England. Could you be less original with your song title name? And it's a real kind of snoozer of a track. And then you also have stuff on here by bands like Tractor End, which is really sounds more like, just 70s pub rock. Spartan Warrior has a track on here. Not a bad band. Definitely not fitting in with the overall theme of this, though. One other rarity that's not bad is Tracer. Their single's a very obscure one, not known by many folks at the time. And so again, worth checking out if you're really wanting to get into that deeper end of new wave of British heavy metal, but the track list could be a little more solid overall. Well, hey, were you expecting more compilation talk right now? Well, originally I did have this video running a lot longer and went straight into some vinyl stuff, but it ran a lot longer than I intended it for, and I figured I'd break it up into a couple of separate videos. So I'm having to do a little edit in here and add a new little ending clip. So, hope you enjoyed this rendition. There'll be another video on new wave of British heavy metal vinyl compilations coming really soon. Until then, everybody take care and keep banging your head.